Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit about what I do, you can check out my website, which is posted down below this video. So what I would like to go over today is actually kind of an elaboration on a video that I did previously on the Nakshatras as they relate to Kundalini Yoga. And these are the Nakshatras from Vedic Astrology. Typically they're associated with the lunar mansions. Are, basically if you divide up the lunar cycle into a circle and you divide it up into pieces, in this particular case 27 separate pieces, then those are what you get, the Nakshatras. And the Nakshatras are essentially they basically give personality or more specificity or detail to the overarching astrological zodiac sign. So for instance, you have a zodiac sign for your moon, you have a zodiac sign for your sun and your ascendant, which are the three placements that I generally consider the most important. So what I want to go over today is going into a little greater detail about what these nakshatras are, how they're relevant to us in terms of our understanding of ourselves, as well as our understanding of nature in general. And also, I want to kind of go over, I guess, again, the applicability in terms of like, what is the practical application of this content, this material, which goes back to Kundalini Yoga. So I will go into that in just a moment. All right, so here we have some stuff scrawled all over a whiteboard, which all looks probably like nonsense. So let me kind of go ahead and go into what we're looking at here. So up in this corner here, this is what I call the nakshatra wheel. Now that nakshatra wheel can be your sun, it can be your moon, or it can be your ascendant. Again, pretty much any wheel that you can divide up into bits and pieces. All wheels you can divide up in this particular case with the nakshatras into these 27 basic divisions. So now what's interesting about the wheel that I created here is this wheel indicates the components that go along with each of the nakshatras. Now the components of the nakshatras have to do with attributes and qualities. And these are qualities or attributes that are universal in nature, universal in creation. And I'll get into that in a bit in a moment when I go into Yogi Bhajan's book. But for now, what we're talking about are the gunas. The gunas are basically universal qualities that are pervasive in all areas of nature and all areas of creation. That includes you and I. And the gunas are literally kind of layered within our being, which is kind of the concept I want to go over today. Again, looking at this idea of the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. So the nakshatras are basically divided up into what I consider like three segments. You have a primary, a secondary, and a kind of a tertiary, I guess a layer. And the first layer kind of represents more your life path. So that is on this wheel over here, that is the general three divisions. So if you divide up all 12 zodiac signs, four will basically fall into each one of those divisions. So beginning right here, that's where you get Aries. So Aries is Rajasic, Rajas at its base. And so again, the gunas, you have Rajasic, Tamasic, and Sattvic. My terrible numbers. So Rajasic is basically proactive, driven, expansive energy. Tamasic is contracting energy. It's also more concerned with material density. And Sattvic is balance or clarity or neutral. So, and those are some generalizations. Actually, you can probably do your own additional research and find tons and tons of descriptions on those qualities, because these are also qualities that are talked about a lot in Ayurveda. So the gunas are basically, we have 3 layers of them. One is relative to your life path, and that is the primary outer wheel. So that is the outermost layer of the circle is your life path. They call it the primary, I guess it'd be kind of like the primary imprinting. So the secondary imprinting would be your attitude or your way. It's kind of like what you, that's really the best way to put it, is attitude. And then finally, you have your kind of your intellect, or more your sort of the functioning of your mind in a lot of ways is considered on the 3rd level. So in this particular case, what we have here is, as we're going up from life path to attitude, the way from primary, secondary to tertiary, what we're getting here is it's gradually becoming more superficial. So our awareness of our life path is not always obvious. But again, if we're going to look at the first placement here, which is in Aries, and that is called as Shwini, it is Rajasic on its life path at its base, primary. Secondary, it is also Rajasic. And tertiary, also Rajasic. So they have a good agreement on all 3 levels. So this is, again, very expansive, very driven energy. Again, we're going from less awareness of to more awareness of. So oftentimes what ends up happening is, as we become more meditative and our focus in life becomes more focused on our energy and our spirituality and our well-being and balance, usually that's when we start to recognize the deeper layer, which is our life path layer. Our attitude and our way also becomes apparent along that way. And then our intellect is usually what we most superficially deal with for most of our lives. So the other way to kind of see this is as density. So this is decreasing density. And what I mean by decreasing density has to do with the elements and nature itself. So on the intellect level, we can, generically call that water. So your emotion, your intellect, things generally like maybe you'd be governed by, like, let's say the moon. Again, what you're having here is water. So that's one layer up as far as density from Earth itself. Then you get fire. So that would be like your attitude, your drive. And then finally air, which is your way. And it becomes progressively less dense, and hence the reason our awareness of is usually less. So we have less awareness of our life path because it is a more subtle element, in this case air. So it's not as easy to perceive. So now moving down my little chart here. So we have the sun, the ascendant, and the moon. So the sun, the ascendant, and the moon, the sun you can generically look at as your soul. The moon you can kind of generically look at as your, we'll say, the ebb and the flow of the mind. So your mental, emotional field is kind of governed by the moon. And then finally your ascendant is sort of, best way to describe that is it's more close to your ego. It's kind of what we end up projecting out into the world. It's sometimes they say it's how people perceive us. I don't necessarily see it like that, but what I do see is it's kind of like what we end up projecting out into the world. That's the best way to put it for me. Now, how this works is that the sun has a particular nakshatra, the ascendant has a particular nakshatra, and the moon has a particular nakshatra. So we can actually, again, using what I'll get to in a moment with Yogi Bhajan's book, we can get to looking at the sun, the moon, and the ascendant as each one of those having different qualities or attributes that we can actually work on. So, in my particular case, my moon is in Pusha. And so there is a specific exercise that Yogi Bhajan gives in his book for the energies that are related to Pusha. So, and again, I won't go into too much detail about that at the moment, but what we have here is opportunities. we have opportunities to work on and perfect certain things. And again, these are generally the three most, I guess, influential forces, astrologically speaking, in our life. Now, how else you can kind of look at this is that you've got this person here, and so your physical body is representative of the earth. And as our feet and everything are connected to the actual physical earth itself. So obviously that is the greatest level of density. Then we've got the moon. Again, it's your mental emotional field. So it's kind of around you, so to speak. Again, because the mind is etheric in nature. It's not necessarily part of the body. It's that, that ebb and the flow and that change that is occurring within us all the time is very much governed by the moon. And then your sun is kind of the overarching theme of your soul. And that's, I guess, soul is really the best way I can kind of describe sun. So looking at these nakshatras, we'll use, let's do an example, something specific. Let me find something here. So I wrote an example up here. So it's tamasic at its base, rajasic as a secondary characteristic or attitude, and sattvic at its intellect, which corresponds to, let me see if I can find it. One moment. So that corresponds to Uttara Falguni. Again, that probably means nothing to you, but Uttara Falguni, basically it is a sign, I believe it's in Virgo. So again, there's a lot of characteristics that go along with each one of these nakshatras, and each one has again, a lot of characteristics. And I'll show you some books at the end of this video that you can look at in order to sort of do some research and discovery on these. But basically, what this is describing is a person, we'll say it's the moon. We'll say this is this person's moon sign. So tamasic at their base means that overall their life path is very, very, very interested in material things, in density, and it could be pleasure, it could be, accomplishing material things, it could be, again, finding ways to deal with the material world, with the earth itself. So again, that's tamasic, that is contracting. So any contractive force in life is going to force you to look at what is dense. Again, not saying it's a bad thing, just simply saying it's dense. On his secondary level, he's got this rajasic energy. So that rajasic energy on a secondary level means that the attitude or the way of the individual is very driven. It's very driven and could be very goal-oriented. They have to slow down a little bit, but generally speaking, I would say their attitude or their way is that of enthusiasm. And on the intellect level, or the most superficial level, the part that affects their personality, a fair amount, is sattvic. So meaning having a mind that seeks, or an intellect rather, that tends to want to look at balance. So they're looking for balance. And so, again, this is kind of a mutable characteristic on some level when somebody has a sattvic kind of intellect, in that, balance is seldom actually obtained, and it's always worked towards. So here we have this person who has generally a sattvic kind of tendency mentally or intellectually, very enthusiastic, attitude in life, towards material things. So a mind that's going to make good decisions with great enthusiasm towards material things. Now, their challenge here might be learning to slow down. This person might need to slow down. Just because that rajasic energy, which is part of their way, can sometimes be, move a little bit too quickly and go a little bit too fast. And sometimes we can have the blinders on and we can go past our goal. So nonetheless, again, what here is that their sattvic mind ultimately is going to sort of dictate what they're moving toward over the course of their life path. So I think hopefully that's somewhat clear. So in the next portion of this video, I'm going to go ahead and cover the books that you can get this information out of. All right, so what I've got focused on here is a book called The Mind. And this book was written by Yogi Bhajan, and this is the book in which I got the content out. Yogi Bhajan calls them the projections. So he's the one who created the idea of these projections, and there's 27 of these projections, which again is how I made the association with the nakshatras, them being 27. And again, the nakshatras being linked to the gunas, and Yogi Bhajan's projections also linked to the gunas. Now, this is an excellent read. This is a well-loved book. It's got lots of content in it in terms of talking about the nature of the mind. But again, for me, the most important part of this book is the flowchart in the back and the exercises that are given. So the flowchart in the back, this is the part of the book that I became pretty obsessed with for a while. Again, I love charts and graphs and things of that nature. So this chart is all based on density. It's based on the density of the elements. So you can see off in this column here, you've got ether, air, fire, water, earth. And again, increasing density. And it's increasing density all coming from the universal mind, or chitta. So as it becomes progressively more dense, the elements also become more dense. And so again, the area we're focusing on specifically are the 27 projections, which are at the level of water. So using the example that I gave you guys earlier of Uttara Falguni, and I realize I'm probably mispronouncing that. Anyway, I mispronounce all these words. So the idea here is that looking at Uttara Falguni as it's described in the texts as having tamasic energy at its base, secondary energy of rajasic energy, and a third layer of energy, which is sattvic, which all corresponds to the judge, number 6. Now how that works is, so chitta goes in the tamas, first layer, tamas, then goes down to this first section, which all deals with the negative mind. And so the negative, then what you do is you look at Akankar, which is another word for rajasic. Basically, it's energy which attaches. And then finally, it flows down into neutral or sattvic, which is the judge. And there's another chart in the book which makes this a little more easy. It's just not graphically as interesting, which is this chart here. So this is the negative mind, which then, so the first grouping of negative mind. Second is rajasic energy, again that word Ankankar. And then finally neutral or judge. So tamasic, rajasic, sattvic, judge. And that's it. So projection 6. And so that's basically how you use this book. Again, it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it to anyone. Great read. So now the other books that I have here are for the nakshatras specifically. And these are where you get the attributes. So these are the attributes of the nakshatras. And both of these are very good books. And I highly recommend them. I don't want to go into too much detail about each one of these books. But Bipin Bihari wrote this one, and this one is Robert Svoboda, and both of them are great. I kind of prefer the Bipin Bihari book a little bit. It's very romantic in how he's, I guess, the language he uses, and it's full of archetypes and lots of depth. So it's an excellent book. Whereas The Light on Life is actually kind of more of a technical, it seems like more technical language. If astrology can be technical, I guess it can be. So those are the two books that I most frequently used. And you can see all of my books are very well loved. All right, so in conclusion, what I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit is why you might want to take this particular approach to astrology and yoga. So there's something really wonderful about any sort of, I guess, path that can lead you towards awareness. I happen to prefer ancient tradition, so hence astrology works for me. The thing about any sort of ancient path is that it is contemplative in nature. So astrology is very contemplative. It forces me to reflect on those attributes which I see in my chart. So I am a sun sign Pisces. Pisces has XYZ characteristics. Now I can reflect on those characteristics, both the positive and negative aspects, and determine whether or not they're accurate. And if they do seem and feel relatively accurate, then I have a step up on things. And that now I'm all of a sudden aware of particular patterns that are playing out in my life. And that awareness allows me to be objective, which is incredibly important in making choices. So that's what astrology, in essence, that's how I use astrology. So the other way you can kind of look at these things is, again, let's take it from the yoga perspective, is that if you do nothing, nothing happens. So yoga, in essence, I don't even think of it as a spiritual path so much as I think about it as, how do I say this, an agglomeration of techniques which, I guess if you utilize these techniques correctly, they move energy, and they move energy for the point of what? For meditation. And again, everything is about meditation, whether astrology and the contemplative nature of astrology, or the concentration aspect of Kundalini yoga. All these things are meant to essentially move energy. So that's why astrology and yoga, as I perceive them, are complementary systems. So in essence, how you can utilize all this is, you find out what your nakshatra is specifically for your sun, your moon, and your ascendant, and you look them up accordingly in the book The Mind, and you find the exercise to do. And I guarantee if you do those exercises for 40 days, you will notice a smoothing over of the attributes and characteristics that are associated with those signs. Now, what I mean by smoothing over is do they go away? Do the negative aspects, the shadowy aspects of each one of those nakshatras disappear? No. What these systems do is they allow you to accept both the negative and positive aspects of all that you are. And again, this is a beautiful thing, because acceptance allows flow, and acceptance acknowledges the fact that there is something greater. You can call it spirit, you can call it prana, chi, shen, whatever you want to call it. There's this greater force of energy which is moving through us perpetually, always from point A to point B, from birth to death. And the greater we can accept that flow of energy, the more likely us, the ego, the personality, can sit back, relax, watch the show, and make choices. So with all that said, I appreciate you watching the video, and thank you much.